Shwmae pawb, hello everybody. Croeso cynnes iawn, a very warm welcome to my wild Welsh garden. Well, the hat's come out, so yes, it's getting colder. Still okay for me to sit in my summer house to talk to you, but yeah, this video isn't actually about my garden. It's about the river that runs alongside my village here. Well, those of you who live in the UK will be very familiar with the problems with our rivers, which are in a pretty dire state. And it's all to do with the water companies and the regulator. What can I say? Not performing perhaps as well as they could do. Well, there's only one water company in Wales, Dŵr Cymru, Welsh Water, and it's a not-for-profit organisation, so it's not a private company, so it doesn't even have the excuse of having to give its shareholders huge dividends. But it's it has amongst the highest water bills of the UK, and it's one of the worst performing in terms of its environmental protection. Yeah, so I really don't know what's going on there. And we have a different regulator from England as well. We have Cyfoeth Naturiol Cymru, which is Natural Resources Wales. And well, that doesn't seem to be doing its job properly either. So I was very pleased to hear about an organisation that I'd never come across before. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, so bear with me. But it's called Ymddiriedolaeth Afonydd Gorllewin Cymru. Ymddiriedolaeth is such a fabulous word. It took me ages to learn how to say it and even longer to remember it, but it means trust. So it's the West Wales Rivers Trust, and it's a charity which exists to safeguard and restore the rivers of West Wales for people and for wildlife. And they were asking for volunteers to adopt a section of river or a tributary and sort of look after it, really. You know, just ordinary people like me who enjoy a walk along their local river. So to either inform them of problems like pollution or invasive species like Japanese knotweed or balsam, things like that, to doing things sort of much more technical and scientific, like monitoring water quality and doing wildlife surveys. And yeah, I heard about this and I thought, well, I could do that. So I got in touch with them and said I would very much like to adopt the river that runs alongside my village. And yeah, so that's what I've done. And I wondered if you'd like to come for a walk with me along the river and see what I've adopted. I'm standing on a bridge looking towards the sea down the River Tower. The River Tower gives the name to Abertower, which is the Welsh name for Swansea. Aber meaning the mouth of, so Swansea is at the mouth of the River Tower. The river's very, very low at the moment. We've had a very dry couple of weeks, which has been very unusual for the last 18 months, really. And so you normally can't see quite so many rocks and stones in the water. But when it is low like this, I often see dippers dipping around on the rocks down there. And I think it's pretty obvious that most of the river is inaccessible. There's no paths along either side on this stretch of the river. And here is one of the first examples of the kind of river pollution that we get in Wales. Can you see there's a brown stain down the side of the river? It goes all the way down to where the rocks start appearing. And that's because the water is coming out of an old mine works and it's bringing iron in the water, which is colouring it brown. The entrance to the mine is behind that very substantial green fence there. And this is looking in the other direction, towards the source of the river, up in the uplands of Abanau Brycheiniog. And just round the corner there, it goes under the main road. And then there's a path along the river that starts there. So I'm going to take my life in my hands, go back over the main road, and I'll see you on the other side. I'm walking along the path on the side of the river. Well, I think you can see that the local council Doesn't maintain the fence very well. And I'm walking through an area of ancient woodland. It's temperate rainforest, or also called Celtic rainforest in Wales. This is a globally rare habitat because it only grows in very special conditions, which are areas of high rainfall all year round and mild winters and cool summers, which are exactly the conditions that we have here in West Wales. And at one time, temperate rainforest would have covered the whole of the west side of Wales. But it was all cleared for agriculture, and now there are only these tiny fragments left. And it's characterised by epiphytes. These are plants that grow on other plants. And I think you can see on that branch over there that there's a lot of moss and little ferns growing. And there's mosses pretty much growing on every surface that there is, like on this wall here. And there's a little tiny fern. I think that the lichens need more light than the mosses and the ferns, because you don't tend to see it growing down here much. It grows on the tops of the trees where there's more light, and you do see it when the branches and the sticks and the twigs fall off or get blown off. I've just picked these up off the floor as I've been walking along. Winter's a good time to come into these little fragments of rainforest when there's very few leaves on the trees, because the trees are showing off their wonderful shapes. When the river is low like this, you can see how it's carved a sort of channel for itself through the rock. I've heard it said that Celtic rainforest likes growing on these steep valley sides and gorges, but the reality is that this is the only place that it can survive, because everywhere else has been cleared for agriculture. And these are the only places really where agriculture can't happen. And now we come to another source of pollution in this river, and that's domestic sewage. It's not a very nice subject. But the village is only up on the left there, and there's a sewer that runs right down the middle of the main road there. And there's all sorts of drains, land drains, that go into the river. And this one here leaks raw sewage. Well, I've complained about it several times, and I've always been told that it's functioning normally. So for years, I've avoided coming down here. And if I have, I've sort of gone gingerly round the edge, for obvious reasons. But this year I thought, well, no, this isn't right. And, if this is functioning normally, then normally isn't right. And I would try and do something about it. It actually doesn't look too bad at the moment because it's all covered with these lovely field maple leaves. But under there is a manhole cover. But sometimes after rain, it leaks round the manhole cover, and sometimes the cover even lifts up with the force of the water. And then it all drains down here and goes into the river, and somebody's very kindly removed some of the wall there so that it doesn't flood the path but just drains straight down into the river. So a lovely young man called Tiff came from the West Wales Rivers Trust, and he walked the river with me and came to see this manhole, and he agreed that it was pretty dreadful, took photographs and took it up from his organisation. And yes, well, I had an email from one of the engineers, and he said that the problem was a surcharging manhole and it was due to hydraulic overload, and that some operatives were going to come out and try and investigate the root cause. And then I had a phone call this morning to say that some people are actually going to come out and do some work. So how good is that? Having put up with it for so long, it looks like it might get fixed soon. Most of these big old trees are oaks. There were some ash, but mostly that's died through ash dieback. But these are not the stately oaks of England at all. No, they're definitely the gnarly, twisted oaks of the land of mists and wizards and druids and legends. Another of the problems that the Welsh rivers have to contend with are invasive species. And I've just spotted one over there. It's Rhododendron ponticum. Now, I don't think it's a big problem down here in South Wales, but I think it's a much greater problem for them up in North Wales. And this is another invasive species just by the path here. This is Crocosmia or Mombretia with the orange flowers. This is the part of the river that has all the industrial archaeology. This weir was part of the feeder system that fed into the canal that went all the way down the Swansea Valley. It took coal from the coal mines and stone from the quarries down to the ports at Swansea. This is where my daughter goes wild swimming when she comes to stay. And I always think these trees look like prehistoric animals crawling out of the river. The river's wider here. We've come out of the gorge and there's fields on both sides. So the river's much quieter. Just look at those reflections. This is the part of the river where there's more invasive species. This is Japanese knotweed. Fortunately, there's not so much of it here. But Japanese knotweed is really difficult to get rid of. You can't cut it or trim it or dig it up. You can't do anything to damage the plant because it will regenerate from the tiniest little bit of stem or root. So it has to be very carefully poisoned. It has to be done at the end of summer, early autumn, after it's flowered. It's too late to do anything about it this year, but Tiff's put it on his list to be treated next year. There's also a few plants of Himalayan balsam. It's mostly died and sort of disappeared now because of the cold spell that we had a few weeks ago. And again, there's not so much of it, but enough to want to do something about it. Another little patch of knotweed there. Every so often now you can get down to the river. There are these little sandy beaches. And Tiff said that these are good places to check for otters and water voles because you can see their little footprints in the sand. So I've come down onto one of these little beaches to see if I can see any footprints. Well, I can see people's footprints and dogs' footprints. And very difficult to see anything clearly with all these leaves. There's not usually so much beach exposed, to be honest. The river is so very, very low and so very, very still. Salmon are supposed to come up here. Supposed to see them jumping over the weir at the end of the summer, but I never have. But I do sometimes see dippers dipping from the rocks and often flying up and down the river, up and down their territories. So let's see if there are any dippers today. No, no dippers. There's quite a big stand of knotweed here. And there's another one a bit further along on the right. But Tiff was quite positive about them and said it wasn't bad at all and it would be easy to treat. So that's good. And there's more Himalayan balsam along here. There's not so much, and I always pull some up whenever I walk past, and others do too. In fact, there's some hanging on the fence here that I pulled up several weeks ago. Balsam differs from knotweed in that it's an annual and it has quite shallow roots, so it's very easy to pull up. So the complete opposite really to knotweed. And I was told by someone from one of the wildlife trusts that the best thing to do is to pull it up and then hang it on a fence so that the roots are out of contact with the soil, because if the roots are in touch with the ground at all and the ground is wet, then it will just keep growing and it will flower and it will produce seed heads, and the seed heads will explode and the seeds will go everywhere. But actually Tiff said the best thing to do is to break it off at the bottom of the stem, to pull it up and break it off just below the first node, and then it can't grow. And he says then you can just toss it on the floor and it'll just rot down. We've come to the end of the bit of river that I've adopted, that I'm going to be looking after. So I'm just going to turn around and head for home and have some lunch. And it just remains for me to say thank you for visiting me in my wild Welsh garden, first of all, and then for coming on this walk with me along the river. And if you're interested in seeing more of what I get up to in my garden and in the countryside around, then please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Hwyl fawr.